Buonasera a tutti, buonasera al pubblico in sala.
Good evening to all of you, the audience who's here tonight, people who are following us via streaming. We are sorry for the delay, but there was the security check at the entrance. That's why we are a bit late. Please remember to wear your mask. And I want to begin by saying that I'm very glad to be here this evening to introduce wonderful speakers. The theme of this year's festival is maps, and this has allowed us to gather wonderful scientists like those that we are going to listen to tonight, who will speak about the maps of love. We are very curious to listen to them. Very briefly, Alessandra Da Monte, who's a student from a high school in Genoa, will briefly introduce the speakers. Good evening. My name is Alessandra Da Monte. I am the last year in the High School of Science Mazzini in Genoa. We are going to listen to Ruth Feldman, professor of social developmental sciences at the Interdisciplinary Center of Herzliya. Then we will listen to Viviana Kasam, journalist and founder of BrainCircleItalia, and Donatella Marazziti, psychiatrist and expert in biology, expert in the treatment of several mental disorders. Emotions affect many aspects of our life. Is it possible to map emotions in our brain and understand the complex mechanisms underlying them? We understand that there are physiological mechanisms underlying this functioning. Today we were going to analyze the different aspects of this and how emotions are located and play in our brain when love comes into play. Thank you very much indeed, and enjoy this conference. Thank you. Thank you for your help. My name is Adriana Kasam. I'd like to tell you a few words about a new series of lectures. The series of lectures is entitled Emotions. We are speaking about emotions, and we ask only women neuroscientists to talk about this topic. We will go to London, Lisboa, Geneva, and Lugano. We will be in Milan and in Rome very soon. The thing is that no women speakers or hardly ever women speakers are giving lectures at specific symposia on neuroscience. So I was wondering, but why is that so? Is that because there are no women specialized in this field? And why do I invite men so often when we speak about this topic? That's why we said, let's try and identify the excellent women in the world in this field. We found about 100 of them. Some of them are outstanding head of labs in major universities, but they are not very famous. So we decided to gather a panel of women. But of course, these women are targeted to men and women. We are focusing in particular on emotions because up to 30 years ago, women were considered to be victims of their feelings, hysterical, uterine, passionate, and as such, they were considered to be high functioning from the point of view of thinking and insight. This negative stereotype has gone on for decades and since centuries. in the last 30 years, it has been discovered that emotions are fundamental. They are not a negative characteristic. They are a requirement, a tool in order to acquire cognition, to make ethical, moral decisions and economic decisions, financial decisions. These are important for women and for men. Men have been kept far away from emotions in our culture for many, many years. Men don't cry, we used to say. Men don't feel emotions. But I think that we need to gain insight on these aspects in order to be ready for the third millennium. We are living in a beautiful world. But the spirit of aggression, of the aggressiveness that has been characterizing our way of life must change. We need to take into account emotional intelligence. Consider immigration. If we only consider immigration based on numbers and taking without and disregarding or neglecting people, we will go and we will get nowhere. So, in our opinion, talking of emotions is particularly important. We have outstanding scientists. We will listen to two of them tonight. You know them since you are all here. This is one of the first events after the COVID lockdown, and so it's a great opportunity. You may, if you ask me, I can give you our brochures. And we have also prepared for you beautiful T-shirts. Emotionsbrainforum.org is the website you can access to order these T-shirts. We have prepared different T-shirts for each of the cities of our tour. Franco Ghini is the designer, and if you want to buy them, your contribution will be very helpful for us. So before starting, I'd like to say the following. It's difficult to speak of emotions only rationally without evoking them. So for each lecture, each conference, we asked a musician to come and play in order to allow you to feel emotions. Leo Rizzo, violin player, composer, is going to play a short piece he has composed on the theme of love.
Grazie Roberto.
Thank you, Roberto. This is really a beautiful piece of music. I'd like to introduce Ruth Feldman. Besides being one of the greatest scientists in the world in the field of love, she's also a musician. So Ruth is an Israeli scientist. She works at the EDC, Herzliya, Reichman University, and at Yale. She was awarded one of the most prestigious awards in the world, the Emet Prize, that's considered a Nobel Prize in Israel. She has written books, over 300 articles published in all major journals, and her work has also inspired some TV series. Babies from Netflix. Well, the first episode was shot in her office. Love when you're a baby, love that you learn from your parents, passion. Well, this is the topic of Ruth's work. She studies love from the neurological, behavioral, and cognitive standpoints. Her work is extraordinary. She's one of the few scientists who has followed children longitudinally for 20 years to understand what happens to children who suffered from maternal deprivation in the early childhood. And she's also involved in studying paternal love, father's love, which is different from a biological point of view. And recently, she's also getting involved in postpartum depression, which is a topic that is often disregarded. We all know that it does exist, but it's still a taboo. Women do not talk about it. The birth of a child should be a moment of joy, and it's almost shameful to admit that you feel depressed. Ruth, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here and see you all. I'm going to talk about the neurobiology of love, how parenting shapes our brain for a life of close relationship. And I'd like to start. That does not work. Or how does it move?
C'è qualcuno che può venire a aiutare?
I thought he said you have to press this first and then this.
Ecco. This press and
This first and then this.
This. So every time I want to start with some images from the work of Louise Bourgeois, an artist, a sculptor, a writer, a mother, a feminist who was, throughout her career, she was preoccupied with the maternal body, the wonder that we come out of the mother's body, and what a profound effect it has on us throughout life. Developing within the mother's body is the story of mammals. What does it mean to be born a mammal? Mammalian young are born with two important constraints. Their brain is immature at birth, and young maintain close proximity to a nursing mother. This means that the mother's mature brain externally regulates the infant's immature brain and tunes it to social life through a process we call biobehavioral synchrony. And what is biobehavioral synchrony? It is defined as the coordination of biology and behavior between mother and infant during moments of social contact. In the first weeks of life, mothers and infant begin to engage in synchronized interaction in the gaze, affect, cooing, vocal, and touch modalities. These precious synchronized moments provide a template for the coordination of their biological processes. So we found that during moments of synchrony, behavioral synchrony, but not during non-synchronous moments, mother and infants also coordinate their heart rhythms. After synchronous interactions, parent and infants synchronize their oxytocin release. And during face-to-face synchronous interaction, there is brain-to-brain synchrony between mother and infant in key nodes of the social brain. This experience of biobehavioral synchrony is essential. It's an essential critical experience during the first months of life, and it's essential for the maturation of the social brain. It shapes the brain both across time and across relationship. So here you see Maya from birth to adulthood, and in several longitudinal studies spanning birth to adulthood, we found that the synchronous interaction between mother and infant, it's like the 12-bar blues or the basso continuo that keeps playing the rhythm of safety throughout the mother-child relationship. And when new abilities kick in, like symbolic ability, the ability for empathy in adolescent, the capacity to see multiple perspectives, they're integrated into this synchrony, into the rhythm of safety, until mother and child can face each other in an adult-to-adult relationship of mutuality and respect that still contains the familiar rhythms. But not only across time, across the maternal-child attachment, but also it transfers across relationships. So we have behavioral synchrony, autonomic synchrony, hormonal synchrony, and brain-to-brain synchrony, and those are found in various formats across all human relationships, between parents and infants, both mother and father, between romantic partners, among close friends, and also humans are the only species that can coordinate their behavior and synchronize their biology with total stranger to enable the capacity for empathy. So biobehavioral synchrony is the first tenet of the neurobiology of love. The second tenet is the oxytocin system, and here you see the timeline of the evolution of oxytocin. Oxytocin is in fact a very ancient system. It presumably evolved approximately 500 million years ago. It is found in all vertebrate and some invertebrate species, and the role of oxytocin across animal evolution was to help organisms manage life in harsh ecology, a stress response system. With the evolution of mammal, oxytocin is causally integrated into birth and lactation, into the mammalian condition. Oxytocin not only supports bond formation, but it also helps mammals, particularly human, to manage stress through loving relationships. And in this one slide, I summarize for you, one slide and 1 minute, I summarize for you 20 years of extensive research on oxytocin in 4 topics. The first is fatherhood. After showing about 20 years ago that oxytocin is implicated in human mother-infant bond formation, we turned to fathers. And we found that when fathers are involved dead, during the first weeks of life, when you don't measure maternal and paternal oxytocin right after nursing, mothers and fathers have the same level of oxytocin. This was really surprising, but that shows that fathers are biologically prepared to bond with their infants. Since then, it's been replicated both by us and others in numerous studies. The second is that oxytocin is released following touch, contact, hugs, physical proximity, and synchronous interactions with those you love. So if you want to send your partner or your child to his day's work, you better give them a big oxytocin hug that lasts at least 60 seconds, and that will send him or her to a day where they will be more relaxed because oxytocin is anxiolytic, and it will boost their well-being, particularly in a time of pandemic, because oxytocin connects to the immune system through the CD38 molecule. The third topic we examined was what happens when you fall in love. So it turns out we measured oxytocin in samples from birth to old age. The first months when you fall in love, you have the highest level of oxytocin ever. Oxytocin increases measurably when you fall in love. So you fall in love, you feel like you're walking on cloud 9, you're probably walking on very high level of oxytocin. And the fourth very intensive research we carry is what happened to the system when bonding failed. So conditions such as maternal postpartum depression or premature infants that are separated from the mother, or the million of children who live in poverty and war and exile and immigration. When the environment is harsh, the oxytocin system is disrupted in both mother and child, and it doesn't allow the child to develop the brain basis of love. Oxytocin is the second foundation of the biology of love. And the third foundation is the attachment network, the human caregiving network that turns into the attachment network, the brain network that sustains and underpins our capacity to love. It actually begins with the brain basis of mammalian caregiving. The hypothalamus, where oxytocin is produced, becomes sensitized during pregnancy in mammalian mothers, and it sends two projection. I call them the scare and the bliss. Projection to the amygdala to increase maternal vigilance of infant safety, and the bliss to the dopamine subcortical system, the dopamine reward factory, to make the infant the most desired object to the mother. And this triangle, subcortical triangle of hypothalamus, the scare, and the bliss, enables mammalian mothers from rats to elephant to recognize and care and feed and invest and provide a secure habitat to their infants. But to care for human infants is a much more complicated story and requires a lot of cognition and a lot of other systems. So we have deep in our brain this mammalian caregiving network when we become parents, but those are connected via multiple ascending and descending projection to several important cortical networks. One is the empathy network, or the embodied simulation network, the anterior insula, the ACC, some central regions. These enable parents to feel the infant pain and emotion in their own brain. The second is the mentalizing network, essentially frontal region. It enables parents to infer the infant's intention from nonverbal action, theory of mind. And the last is frontal region, the emotion regulation network. It enables parents to multitask what they need to have the future of parenting, but also to provide parenting that matches their cultural belief system, so for the cross-generation transmission of attachment across cultures. So I'd like to just share with you two studies. I chose the first study and the last study, the fMRI studies on the parental brain from our lab. But before that, let me show you what you see here. To your left side is this subcortical maternal caregiving network is what we have. This is the place where I call the marriage of oxytocin and dopamine. Literally in the nucleus accumbens, which is one of the dopamine factory, oxytocin, which provides vigor and reward and energy, is integrated with oxytocin in the same neuron. Those are heteromere neurons that encode for both oxytocin and dopamine, and they integrate to form love. The energy and vigor of dopamine with the social focus of oxytocin to enable to bond and fall in love. But what you see in the middle is that this subcortical system is embedded in the human brain. And with the evolution of the human brain, the human caregiving network became much larger, much more cortical, with much more top-down control, and that was repurposed across evolution, not only for maternal caregiving, but also for pair bonding, for human love and for friendship and for any other relationship, special relationship we form throughout our life, probably with our therapist, with our mentors, with our close friends, with our neighbors. So here I begin by describing two studies where we see how is synchrony implemented in the human maternal brain, and the second one shows how the cross-generation transmission of the human attachment network from parents to child. So in this first study, we went to the home. We follow Lauren's suggestion that if you want to study bonding, you have to go to the pond. We go to the natural habitat, and we videotape mother and infants. We bring the videotape to the lab. We microcode for synchrony, and we use it as stimuli in the fMRI, where we let the parents observe their own interaction with their infants as compared to unfamiliar interaction to look at the exclusivity of attachment. And we divided mother to synchronous mothers, those who provide social stimulation in accordance with the infant signal, in accordance with the infant engagement signals, and intrusive anxious mothers who overstimulate, provide a lot of parenting, and disregard the infant social signals. And we wanted to see first what are the differences in the brain response of synchronous and intrusive mothers. And what we found is that the nucleus accumbens, this dopamine factory, activates about 3 times more in the synchronous mothers. Their music is the music of reward, whereas the amygdala, the scare, activates much more in the intrusive anxious mother. Their music is the music of scare. Next, we took these 2 regions as seed region, and we asked what synchronizes in the brain throughout the 40 minutes where mother's watching these attachment film. And what we saw is that the nucleus accumbens, the dopamine music, was coordinated with all the other human caregiving network, the empathy, the mentalizing, the embodied simulation, the emotion regulation. Whereas the amygdala standalone, there is no top-down, anything that can modulate the mother's anxiety. So we see that synchrony is implemented in the brain not only by a reward coloring, but by integration of the subcortical ancient and cortical, more evolutionarily recent part into an entire integrative network. And this is the last fMRI study with our fMRI. It will come out in a few weeks in SCAN. And this is a cross-generation transfer from parent to child. It's a 20-year follow-up study where we visited the homes of children when they were infants, 3 to 6 months, when they were children, 9 to 12 years, and then when they were young adults, between 19 and 22 years. And we asked, what happens if we show the child those same videos of the mother-child attachment? Do we see activation of the same attachment network in the child as we saw in the mother? This is the same attachment paradigm. We videotape, we code for synchrony, and we show it in relation to an unfamiliar interaction of the same age. And what you see is indeed consistency. The same area, the same network that activates in the mother to attachment cue also activates in the adult child to reminder of the attachment from his or her entire relational history. So we see consistency across generation in the biology of love. Same as mother, same network in the child. But also interesting is that we see consistency across relational history, that we find the same activation in the child's brain to the reminders of himself with a mother when he was an infant, when he was a child, and now when he's adult. As if there is a certain internalization, what Bowlby calls internal working model, or a certain concept that's called attachment with a mother. And any reminder of it, whether a reminder of yourself and a mother when you were an infant 20 years ago, or reminder from 2 weeks ago, will activate this entire process and will show brain activation in the same way and to the same degree. And now that we went through the 3 tenets, the 3 foundation of the biology of love in the single brain, biobehavioral synchrony, the oxytocin system, and the attachment network, I'd like to briefly discuss the same perspective on the 3 tenets of love from a two-brain perspective. Here you see a recent study. It was published in the New York Times. Researchers took electrodes, put them on neuron in the mice brain. When they activated the neurons in a synchronous way, the rats became friendly. They had approach, they played with each other, and when they activated not in synchrony, they lost interest in each other, which shows us that brain-to-brain synchrony combined with behavioral synchrony is a feature of human love. So this is what we do, or other labs do. It's a hyperscanning paradigm where parents, a child, or 2 adults, or children are wearing caps. They are interacting, they have social interaction that is natural and typical, and then you measure the activity and the synchrony between the activity and the 2 brain. So let me briefly describe 2 studies, one of adults and one of infants. This is a study where we had 160 adults in a man-women pair in 3 groups. Romantic partners who lived together for a long time, close friends, a man and a woman who are best friends but never had a sexual relationship, and strangers. And we wanted to measure the balance between interbrain and behavioral synchrony, brain-to-brain neural synchrony and behavioral synchrony in 2 tasks, 2 familiar tasks. One was emotional, empathy giving, and one was motor, when they have to coordinate their motor behavior. One more evolutionarily recent, complex task, empathy given, and one more ancient. This is the empathy task. They have to describe to each other something distressing that happened during the day that's not related to the relationship. We all do that. We come home, we tell our husband, oh, I had a lousy day, my boss screamed at me, the train didn't come on time, etc., and then they switch. So this is highly familiar, turn-taking, but it's a complex task, and it involves the entire brain. It involves synchrony in many linguistic and non-linguistic and emotional circuits. So the brain has to spend a lot of energy on synchronizing during the empathy giving. Second was a motor task, you know, the Etch-a-Sketch, when they had to match the knobs, work together to make 2 pictures. Also highly familiar, but it's a more simplistic, more ancient, and couples do it all the time. They bring the grocery, they set the table, they wash the dishes, they're very familiar. This is how it looks. We expected central to central, motor to motor coordination in the motor task, and a widespread synchrony, very expensive for the brain in the empathy task. And what we found is that in the ancient task, which is very ancient, birds do it when they fly together, fish do it when they swim together, humans do it when they move together. Indeed, we found that couples had much higher behavioral synchrony, much higher brain synchrony, and this linkage, enhancement of brain and behavioral synchrony caused the brain to spend a lot of energy, but they finished the task the quicker, so it saved energy in the long run. What happened in the empathy task, which is only human, a little bit primate, but not language, couples had the highest behavioral synchrony, but the lowest neural synchrony. We found neural synchrony in alpha, beta, and gamma rhythm throughout the brain. And here we found a complementary mechanism. Highest behavioral synchrony can sustain the experience of biobehavioral synchrony when you're in love, when you live together, so the brain can spend less energy on a multi-rhythmic, multi-site synchrony of the 2 brains. And indeed, this pattern led to the greatest report of felt support among the couple. And my last study that I'll describe to you is the role of chemosignals, smell, maternal odor, how maternal odor play a role in mother-infant brain-to-brain synchrony. So we know that newborn recognize their mother's smell from birth. They are attracted to their mother's smell, and that mother's smell reduces infant fear and increases their engagement in positive affect. So here is the experiment. We went to the home and we gave mothers a t-shirt. She had to wear the t-shirts for 2 consecutive nights while she was sleeping, so it contained her smell. She put it in a jar, she put it in a refrigerator, and then 2 days later, she came to the lab with an infant who was between 6 and 10 months. Mother and infant interaction, brain-to-brain synchrony, first back-to-back as a baseline, you see, and then face-to-face, the same proximity. And then we had a stranger mother of the same age infant who interacted with the infant. One in the orange, you see, with the shirt of the mother's odor, and one with a blank t-shirt, okay? So one time, the stranger interacted with the infant in the presence of the maternal body odor, and once not. And we had 3 important findings. This is going to come in 2 weeks. The study is going to be published in Science Advances. First, face-to-face position increases neural synchrony. So in the back-to-back, they had no synchrony, but in the face-to-face, the synchrony measurably increased. So face-to-face social interaction creates the 2 brain in synchrony. Second, we know that humans form exclusive attachment. Infants form brain-to-brain synchrony to a much greater extent with their mother than with a stranger. Okay, stranger synchrony was lower than mother-infant synchrony. However, in the presence of the mother body odor, this difference level out. So when infants interact with a stranger in the presence of the mother's body odor, they synchronize to the same extent as with the mother. They look more, they smile more, there's more approach behavior, and that triggers an increase in brain-to-brain synchrony. We think that this is a mechanism. Odor is the only sensory cue that mothers can leave when she is not around. It remains in the room when mother leaves. And we look at it as a mechanism by which mother help infant transfer from the intimacy of the mother-infant bond to life within social groups. So to summarize, the 3 tenets of the neurobiology of love. The oxytocin system, which implicates plasticity at the cellular, molecular, and network assembly level. It links with the stress reward and immune system, and it also sustains human spirituality, sense of belonging, empathy, and transcendence. The affiliative brain, the attachment network. It builds on mammalian maternal brain. It integrates cortical network, romantic friendship, and group relation. And it expands to love to abstract ideas, such as humankind, God, homeland, cultural and spiritual experiences. And synchrony, it coordinates biology and behavior. It develops within the mother-infant bond, from which it extends to other bond, but also it develops from nonverbal synchrony to a verbal dialogue. But moreover, these 3 tenets of the neurobiology of love, oxytocin, affiliative brain, and biobehavioral synchrony, help transfer infants from the intimacy of the mother-infant bond to life within social group. So oxytocin binds members to social group, it enables social cognition and theory of mind, and it creates in-group cohesion. The affiliative brain enables friendship and shared goal and brain-to-brain synchrony, and biobehavioral synchrony extend to a larger group of kids, but it also enables us through synchronous interaction, one of the more important and deep experience where humans feel moral elevation in synchronous experience when we sing together, when we dance together, when we perform religious and cultural activities together. This biobehavioral synchrony lifts us and creates the most sacred human experiences. So I'd just like to end with the words of the Polish poet Zbigniew Herbert in his poem called Mother. Will always be waiting in a white dress and blue eyes, at the threshold of all doors. So not only emotionally or symbolically, we meet our mother in our future relationship, but also literally and neurobiologically. Both our mother's provisions as well as her failures accompanies us, is engraved in our brain, and it stands at the threshold of all doors. Thanks to my students who carried out these experiments, thanks to my funding agencies, and thank you for listening.
Ruth, there might be time for questions later, but I want to ask just a fast question. Can it be repaired if there is not this bond at the beginning for any reason? Can it be repaired in the future or not?
The answer is yes, and this is why all these three Foundation for the Biology of Love implicate plasticity. These are systems of the oxytocin system implicates plasticity. The attachment network is very plastic. The period when you fall in love or form a bond requires high neuroplasticity to open your brain and incorporate someone else. And biobehavioral synchrony is an experience of plasticity when you're constantly watching and matching someone else. So human, because of their large brain, can repair previous negative experiences with later positive relationships. Yes, the answer is absolutely yes.
Great. Ok, e adesso vogliamo parlare dell'altra faccia dell'amore.
And now we would like to talk about another face of love, jealousy, stalking, violence against women. So why is it that positive feelings such as love become an obsession, become the opposite? But before introducing Donatella Marazziti, let's see how you represent jealousy and harmful or bitter love with music.
Donatella, l'abbiamo sentita la ossessività. Allora.
We perceived obsession in the music. Donatella Marazziti was one of the 10 most renowned psychiatrists of Italy. She wrote several books, among them La natura dell'amore, Vissero tutti gelosi e contenti. She published over 600 papers. She's an expert of love, generally speaking, but more specifically of harmful love. Good evening to all of you. It's nice to see so many people in this hall. Well, thinking that love might be harmful is difficult. We just heard from Ruth her presentation, but I think that her presentation integrates well with my presentation. Love is the reason for happiness in our life. Maybe love is harmful when there's no love, or when we suffer for love, or when we are left by our partner. But I think this is part of life and part of this amazing feeling that nature gave us. We just heard about the brain mechanisms. They are amazing. All this gives us joy. But these same mechanisms can make us suffer. They can turn in awful mechanisms, creating the worst possible pain. So harmful love makes us suffer, or it may create suffering in the partner, becomes something that may result in homicide, suicide, and we see that every day, see such cases every day in papers. I'm going to present three main topics. Love as an affective dependence, jealousy, and the inability to accept the fact that love may end, and that may lead to stalking. This is typical of women. We cannot operate slides. So I'll try to summarize the love circuit. Ruth already mentioned it. How do we fall in love with somebody? It's very simple. It's very easy. We fall in love with somebody because a brain system is activated. It's a system that is based on anxiety and fear. It is very easy to understand. I'll give you an example. We are in this hall. A strange noise is heard, and crackling, let's say. What is it? It might be the beginning of a fire, or it might be a cracking door. So while our brain is organizing our reaction, which might be to flee in case of a fire, but just 6 milliseconds pass. Let's see what happens during those 6 milliseconds. It's the same that happens when we meet a stranger who might turn in a partner. And we have all the senses that are involved, sight, hearing, and odor as well. And the cortex is activated when we are ready to run away because of a danger. There's a lot of blood in our muscles, our heart rate increases. So all this occurs at the level of our conscience. So let's assume we meet a stranger. We have this reaction which activates the subcortical area, which is the amygdala. The amygdala regulates anxiety and fear, And it's a sort of an orchestra conductor, a conductor that decides what to do, whether to run away or to fight. And this mechanism leads to a sort of a storm of neurotransmitters, noradrenaline, which is the one that gives us energy, that wakes us up, and the serotonin. And the hypothalamus is involved as well. Hypothalamus is the factory of our hormones. And through stress, we get ready to either run away or to fight. So that's the interesting part of the story. The hypothalamus produces this important molecule, which is oxytocin. And you might say, it's true, when I'm in love, I'm happy, I'm not afraid, I'm not frightened. Why? Because oxytocin is an amazing molecule. It's a small peptide, 9 amino acids, and you can produce it in laboratory. We administer it to women during childbirth. What does it do, this amazing molecule? It acts on the overexcited area. In the day when, for example, I met a stranger, but somebody I like, but the amygdala is then activated, and then I fall in love. 6 milliseconds after that, the amygdala warns you of the fact that there's no fire, you just fell in love. And then the frontal area make me aware of that. That is to say, that make me understand that that reaction was not anxiety, was not fear, it was just falling in love. And oxytocin played an important role because stress systems were activated. Oxytocin calms all the area and it calms down the stress. And at the same time, as Ruth said, it activates subcortical areas. We'll see them in a minute, which is the reward circuit. But I would like to add something else. As my colleague said, the mother-child bond is extremely important. It's the primary bond because we, as adolescents and adults, may establish deep relationships, and we manage to love somebody when we are adults in a harmonious way. Why is the caregiver important? Why is the mother important? A harmonious or a good or bad relationship with the mother or a good relationship is like a sort of a treasure that I can store in an area of my brain that is responsible for memory, but also for learning. And that's fundamental for my relational life. If my memories are good, when I meet a stranger, the amygdala, the conductor, and the amygdala maybe understand whether a stranger is good or bad. The amygdala, of course, has no eyes. The amygdala is blind. Discrimination comes from the cortex. But even before the cortex responds, the amygdala already knows whether that stranger is good or bad by comparing the quality of this stimulus with the memory and the memories that I stored in the hippocampus that shows the fact that in order to be good at loving, we must have had a caregiver, a parent who loved us. But the good news was told by the colleague, we can always learn to love. We can always have healthy feelings in the future. There's a recent study that was published on Nature that published that there are stem cells in the hippocampus. And this was also found in the autoptic samples of people of 90 years of age. That means that we can still be able to fall in love and to learn till the last day of our life. So this is the circuit that is activated when we fall in love. Try to bear in mind these names. We'll go back to them. So we fall in love because serotonin is low, because we have a lot of noradrenaline, and then there's oxytocin that is responsible for positive feelings, for joy, and it calms down stress. So when we are in love, when we are in a couple, we are healthier. We don't become ill. When we have a single life, it's easier to become sick, males more than females. And maybe oxytocin might play a fundamental role in this because it's a powerful anti-inflammatory substance and might be used to treat patients with a severe form of COVID-19. So as I said, oxytocin is important because it calms down the stress, but it all activates the dopaminergic pathway through the reward circuit.
Di quello che sottende il piacere. Quindi è questa molecola che velocemente viene sintetizzata che va da una parte all'altra.
This molecule that is synthesized very rapidly, but also in the margin of the brain, and perhaps it's also produced up there. We often think of the brain and of brain maps, but we are a whole. Noradrenaline, oxytocin flow through the blood. We have a brain and brain maps, but we shouldn't forget our body through which emotions are expressed. So it's really like a play and a stage, and you have to consider all of these components. So these extraordinary systems that make us feel happy may really function properly. I think that you might have recognized in the dopaminergic system as the system that gives us joy but also addiction. Most abuse substances then end up impairing the dopamine system and this brain system. And this leads us to the first type of harmful love. This is a subjective harmful love. It's detrimental for those who feel it. I'm saying this very humbly because artists come first before us. There is this beautiful sonnet by Shakespeare where there is a very clear description of what affective dependence is. Affective dependence is a disproportionate love. It's a distorted attachment to a partner. This is typically a female pathology. So attachment to a man who's worthless, who doesn't love us, who stays with us because he has nothing else to do, because we are prone to all his desires. And you see that more or less all the clinical features of this kind of dependence reminds us of addiction, substance addiction. Sometimes there is, in this case, an inborn dopamine deficit. But there is a beautiful book published by Norton on this pathology, Women Who Love Too Much. Well, they have a history of child abuse or neglect from their mothers or absent mothers. So these women have built love maps in the hippocampus that prevent them from loving, let's say, properly, in the sense that they cannot love with joy. And the love maps who do not get built or that are distorted, well, don't perhaps follow, that these stories are repeated with all the children of the same mother. And let's move to another aspect of love that creates so many problems. What is jealousy? It's a green-eyed monster. It's a monster that does not love the flesh he nourishes himself on. Defining jealousy is not easy equally, and perhaps this is the best definition given by an Australian scientist. It's the perception of risk of loss of a significant relationship. When one partner perceives that the relationship is under some real or imaginary threat of loss from a rival. So the common sense is that there is not love without jealousy. But what does this mean? If jealousy is, let's say, normal, standard, if it's not an impairment of character, or it's not, so it's accepted. If it's not something that has been created by men to submit women, well, if we accept the idea that jealousy is an important factor of true love, but it must be like a spice. You put a spice in your meal, but you should not be aware that it is there. So if jealousy is strictly associated with love, then it must have a reason when love has a reason. But why is it so that it is still there? It is likely to be a warning signal that activates the areas we see when we are in love, that warns us that our young, beautiful partner might be unfaithful to us. So it's a potential threat. And when is jealousy normal, ordinary? When isn't it? When is it that it is not harmful? Well, it is not harmful if it does not cause pain to the individual experiencing it, and it usually calms down or disappears through reassurance from the partner. Morbid pathology is a complex phenomenon. It may be severe or even very severe. It is usually chronic, it's long-lasting, or it is recurrent. It is not responding to reassurance or to the evidence that there is no infidelity, and it is causing much suffering to the individual and to the partner. And the other problem with jealousy is that often the person experiencing it loses ground, is no longer in touch with reality, and may suffer from the so-called Othello syndrome. Morbid jealousy is often the symptom of an underlying disorder, including alcoholism, substance abuse, neurological disorders. But is it a specific pathology? Well, Othello syndrome was studied years ago. Today, morbid jealousy is considered to be a symptom of other nosological categories. For instance, depression or panic disorder. It may be a symptom of panic. People who cannot go out of their homes because they fear anxiety attacks, and then they fear that their partners may betray them, or jealousy may be a type of jealousy typical of obsessive compulsive disorders, recurring thoughts, and we have demonstrated in some trials that jealous patients, obsessively jealous patients, have a specific expression of serotonin. And you can see that when these systems are involved, serotonin and dopamine, that are so important for our brain and for our social interaction. Most of our brain is in charge of making us social beings. Well, when there is an impairment of these systems, we have a problem in our social behavior. There may be paranoia. I have no doubt that my partner is unfaithful to me. Othello is vulnerable. He has married a beautiful young woman, and he is an ugly man, and he starts having doubts, obsessive doubts, and then delusion. Just a handkerchief convinces him that Desdemona was unfaithful to him. So, what is the perfect balance? The perfect balance must be achieved between these two important neurotransmitters, which, by the way, are interconnected. When serotonin goes up, dopamine goes down, and vice versa. Of course, there are continuous fluctuations throughout our lives, but what is important is that fluctuations are not too profound. So when there are fluctuations, there may be problems with obsessive compulsive disorders, or vice versa. There may be delusion, and we know that delusion is given to an excess in dopamine. And based on clinical observation, we have designed a model. Of course, we have dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, but many other agents. These are important because they are very archaic. They come from very ancient animals before us. So normal serotonin, dopamine, normal jealousy. But when serotonin starts going down, jealousy goes up. When serotonin goes down, there is obsessive jealousy. If at the same time dopamine goes up, well, there is a loss of awareness of the disorder and paranoia kicks in. It's quite important to understand the jealousy and to investigate into jealousy. Jealousy is often the fuel that triggers the guns of some partners. It's often the fuel, the basis of homicides, suicides that there are quite everyday events in our country. It happens every day. The good thing is that women have more oxytocin than men, so perhaps women love more than men, except at the beginning when the child is born. Mother and father have the same levels of oxytocin, then let's say we make up. And jealousy must not be underestimated. Never forget it. Especially female partners are very forgiving. Well, I will help him, I will manage, but when anger sets in, or when there is battering, you must be worried from the very first minute. We have undertaken several studies starting from clinical observation in patients, in Parkinson's patients. Parkinson's disease, we know, is due to a deficit in dopamine. In this, in Parkinson's disease, therapy is often based on dopamine agonists. At that type, at that point, very frequently, we observe a typical kind of delusion, a delusional jealousy. And so we have investigated this assumption. Our assumption is that dopamine agonists increase dopamine in a specific subcortical area, that is the striatal ventral nucleus, that is very important in the attribution of salience, that is to say, the attribution of meaning to a stimulus, which is the relationship in this case. When dopamine is impaired, or when there is too much dopamine in that specific location, the notion of salience is altered. And so from neutral, it may become very significant. Dopamine is altered in the mesolimbic area of the brain, which also impairs cognitivity and distorts cognition. And at this point, we misconstruct real events and delusion sets in. This is an explanation that I will briefly summarize later on. At the same time, a jealous person is hyper-aroused, and there is also perhaps a distorted form or attachment in jealous individuals. So very simply, when there is too much dopamine in that nucleus, in the striatum, delusion sets in. And this is the real delusional jealousy. The individual is convinced that his or her partner is unfaithful. I remember a patient who was convinced that his wife was unfaithful because red cars were passing by and in the area. So you can understand, jealousy must be never underestimated, especially by psychologists and psychiatrists that are often asked to help, because jealousy is often associated with anger, violence, and stalking. What is stalking? Stalking is a persecution, a form of persecution of a former romantic partner, or search for closeness with a stranger or with a famous person, with a celebrity we even don't know, and who, of course, does not reciprocate us. I remember Jodie Foster, for instance, in the past. Jodie Foster was persecuted by a stalker who then tried to assassinate Ronald Reagan. And he wrote a letter to Jodie before that, telling her, I will assassinate Reagan so that then afterwards you will love me. Sometimes there is a real underestimation of the dangers, of the risks in that are quite common with this kind of jealousy. And these jealous individuals are aggressive in 90% of the cases. Let's imagine a stalker, hyperactive, obsessive, delusional. From a psychological point of view, there is a complete alteration or distortion of an affective relationship with a constant, repetitive, iterative kind of thinking that despite police intervention, despite sanctions or whatever, pushes the individual to continue to behave in a certain way. There is a loss of control, there is a loss of contact with reality, and there is then a kind of distortion that may lead to anger, impulsiveness, or aggressive behavior. The stalker is not aware of the risk. He is entirely lost. He is no longer aware of what may happen. And in this case, too, we think that this may be due to biochemical alterations. In a stalker, serotonin has almost disappeared. Serotonin is very, very low. Noradrenaline is very high, and probably there is the dependence circuitry, dopamine, that is hyperactivated. There is perhaps a chronic insufficiency of dopamine in these individuals, which tends to increase aggressive behavior. And so delusion regarding the certainty of a relationship. So there is probably a totally distorted form of attachment, and this probably results from an attachment style that was not firmly developed in infancy. Probably, and from what we know from clinical and legal cases, there may be a history of abuse, of rape, of neglect, or there may be a history of orphanage, for instance. So distorted oxytocin development. And I would close by saying that I hope that I succeeded in making it clear that love is embedded in human nature. It's built inside us. We already know that. We have also seen that it's quite easy to get in love, to fall in love, but in order to undertake in order to be in a real romance, you need time. There are biological systems that help us. We may change partners along our lives. We live so many years, and we are likely at a certain point of our life to have curiosity prevailing over fidelity. So in order to have oxytocin and dopamine in the right balance, we need to move. We've seen the circuitry. We've seen how when these are impaired, that same circuitry may lead to problems, morbid pathology, stalking, impulsiveness, and aggressiveness. So we should say that loving is a risky thing. Love is a fearless fear because stress systems are activated, and we love that. But as Stendhal wrote, love is a beautiful flower, but we must be brave enough to pick her up from the edge of a precipice. I hope I've made it clear that those two systems are very fragile. Everything works smoothly if we are born in a nice setting with caring and loving parents, and if in our infancy nothing bad happens. When we are adults, more resilient, with a healthy brain, with solid love maps, we may withstand everything. As Goethe said, love is a beautiful flower, but there is only one certainty in the world, because nothing is more essential than love. But so what are we talking about today? We are talking about a science that can help us love properly in the right manner, because throughout our life we can change, we can stop becoming attached to partners that make us suffer and that do not love us as we wished. So the science love is not creating a love potion, which is quite easy, but science teaches us how to love, how to respect those extraordinary circuits. I'm really fond of this topic. Science should also help us avoid love deviating from the right pathway, and to prevent harmful love. Without brain, there is no mind, and without biology, there are no human psychological phenomena. And I would like to thank the organizers of this science festival. It's the second time I've come here, and I'm so glad to see so many people in the room in the era of COVID. And finally, I'd like to thank our host, Viviana Kasam, who gathered so many outstanding women for this event. Thank you, Donatella, and thank you, Ruth. I think that we have no time for questions because we are running really late. If you have urgent questions, of course, we will be around for answering. But if you want to leave, please go. I know that we are very late. Thank you.
Grazie allora.
Thanks everybody. And you can have the brochures of our Emotions event. We have some of them here. Otherwise, you can download them from the website.